Wow, out of all of the players in the National Football League, one analyst just picked a 49er. The bold prediction that is made is not just believable. I think it's actually inevitable the more I think about it. This prediction fills a big need. It answers big questions and could be the X factor that we need going into next year. If you're new here, I'm Nate, and if you're looking for daily 49ers content, hit that subscribe button. It does help me out, and it will make sure that you get more of my content in your feed. Daily 49ers videos is what I'm doing here, but it's the off season. Let's have some fun real fast. Who is your favorite wide receiver not named Jerry Rice? So if you had to pick who is your favorite wide receiver not named Jerry Rice, comment it down below. Then tomorrow, I'm going to tell you my pick, plus I'm going to highlight and shout out some of your picks as well as do a poll. So stick around for all of that. And by the time you're watching this video, that poll is already live. So make sure that you go vote on that poll and pick your favorite wide receiver not named Jerry Rice. But let's move into the news you've been waiting for, which is Lindsey Theory looked throughout the entire NFL and picked one guy to have a breakout season. Now, she could have picked a team. She could have picked a coach. She was given the option there. All of the ESPN, all the major ESPN analysts were given options there. And Lindsey Theory just picked Ricky Pearsall to be the breakout player this 2025 season. Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver for the 49ers. The 49ers drafted Pearsall with the intention that he would play a larger role in his second season, but after recovering from a gunshot wound, he was needed earlier than anticipated following a series of injuries to teammates. After a full offseason with quarterback Brock Purdy, along with the likely departure of Deebo Samuel, who requested a trade, Pearsall will prove why the 49ers took him in the first round. Which, before we get into the idea of Ricky Pearsall for a second, I want to also go back into the memory bank and remind you of what happened last year at the draft when the 49ers drafted Ricky Pearsall. Around that time, there was all this conversation about if Deebo Samuel and or Brandon Aiyuk would be traded prior to the draft. Once the draft happened, after the first round of the draft, they picked up Ricky Pearsall. And of all the times to think, oh, okay, definitely one of these two guys is gone. Then they said, John Lynch said after the first night, they're no longer on the table, which tells me, of course, that means that the 49ers were looking for a first round move in order to let go of Deebo Samuel and or Brandon Aiyuk, and they couldn't get what they wanted because they were probably looking for a top 10, maybe even a top 5 kind of pick for one of these two guys. And it seems to me that the 49ers picked up Ricky Pearsall because all along they believed that one of these two guys was going to be gone, or maybe even more specifically, maybe they just always knew Deebo Samuel was going to be on his way out. They did a restructure with him this offseason, which I thought was kind of an interesting one, and we could dive into the weeds on why the 49ers did a restructure on Deebo Samuel. But I think the more interesting thing is what the long-term play is here for the 49ers, who are obviously now going to move on from Deebo Samuel. It's clear they couldn't get what they wanted last year. Then after this past season just happened, they're definitely not going to get anything better than that, than whatever they were offered last year, this year. So it's looking like the 49ers are going to be losing Deebo Samuel in some way, shape, or form. And really, it's all going to come down to managing the cap hit at this point, because they're probably not going to get amazing draft capital for Deebo Samuel going forward. Now, can he be in a package deal for another trade, including your own draft picks and other people's draft picks and things like that? Absolutely, that could totally happen. So there are some wild trade ideas out there. If you're interested in trade ideas, I'd be happy to talk about them. I just don't know if that's the type of content you're looking for. But let me know in the comments if you're like, yeah, give me more of that kind of stuff. I'd be happy to talk about those things. I think I only talk about them when it seems like they're the most relevant and most interesting thing that we should talk about today. Also, let's get to Ricky Pearsall now, okay? Because you draft Ricky Pearsall, which looks like a bad draft pick in a lot of ways, and folks were very critical of it, considering you did end up signing Brandon Aiyuk to a massive deal and Deebo Samuel stuck around and got a restructure. So it looked very confusing for the 49ers drafting Ricky Pearsall. Things look a little bit clearer if Deebo Samuel's gone as expected this year, and Ricky Pearsall's then able to go into some kind of a slot type of role similar to what Deebo Samuel has done in the wide receiver position. But the one big difference that Slick Rick is much better at beating the man than the current version of Deebo Samuel that we have. Now, there's a fair question of how good will Ricky Pearsall be. This picture right here, this way on the screen that you can see, that photograph was taken during which game? It was taken during the game against the Detroit Lions when Ricky Pearsall had his best game of the season, and that was that little fingertip catch. It still wasn't as good as that highlight he had from Florida, but it's pretty darn good. It was a great catch, sideline catch, managed to bobble it. But here is what happened against the Detroit Lions for Ricky Pearsall, his best game of the season. If you're going to have a best game of the season, have it against the Detroit Lions. Good move there. Why is Malik Mustafa so blurry? That's super weird. I got to figure that out. Anyway, 8 receptions for 141 yards. That's an average of about 17 and some change yards per reception. He got a TD, even rushed a couple of times. And so do I believe that he's a Deebo Samuel replacement? Absolutely not. I don't see that happening. Is it possible, as I've heard some suggest, that CMC would kind of go into more of a wide back type of role like Deebo Samuel, and maybe that would leave a little more miles left on Christian McCaffrey's tires? That's possible, absolutely, and I would not be opposed to seeing Christian McCaffrey playing more of a wide receiver kind of role if it means that he's less likely to break down as fast. Will Kyle Shanahan, will he allow that kind of a change to take place for Christian McCaffrey? That's a good question, because I think we rely incredibly heavily on his, We rely really heavily on his X factor approach and some of the extra little things that he can do. And so I don't know that they would, I don't know if I can see Kyle deciding to let him really line up more as a wide receiver 90% of snaps. Now, could he do like a 50-50 sort of deal? That's possible for sure. And if you have, let's just say for the sake of the argument, Jordan Mason on one side and Christian McCaffrey on the other side, and you don't really know what the 49ers might do in that situation, because Christian McCaffrey could still be, as he always is, so many other possible routes and so many other different values that he can bring offensively speaking. All of that kind of stuff is interesting. I think it's all possible. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. But on the Ricky Pearsall idea, because he can handle that sticky coverage, or at least that's the belief that he can handle that sticky coverage, we needed badly a man beater this season. And it would be really interesting with Brandon Aiyuk coming back, hopefully being healthy. If he's playing at a high level, then that's going to open up some lanes for Ricky Pearsall as well. Some opportunities for both players will benefit in that situation like we've seen in the past. So I like the idea. I like the bold prediction. And like I said in the intro, the more that I think about it, the more I feel like we are going to see a Ricky Pearsall who only got to play in a handful of games, that only got to play at a high level in a couple of those games, but managed to do 400 yards, managed to be involved and get a couple touchdowns. I do believe that Ricky Pearsall can very much be an important figure going forward. And with Deebo Samuel's departure, I think it makes Ricky Pearsall a much more interesting player to Kyle Shanahan and some of his scheming, because we saw so many times, guys, it just felt like, minus the one game of which Deebo Samuel complained about and then got a bunch of targets the following game, which is an issue in itself. Come on, Kyle, don't do that. But the number of opportunities that Deebo Samuel got this year that just literally were nothing. They just turned out to zero or even tackle for loss. There were so many times that Kyle Shanahan was clearly trying to get Deebo in, get him in rhythm, get him in the game, because there are so many, we've seen over the years, so many values you can get out of a guy like Deebo Samuel if you can get him involved and get him in rhythm. He never did get in rhythm in the backfield, and he had a couple good games, but he was not the type of player that we needed him to be with Brandon Aiyuk out We just needed Deebo Samuel to be far more valuable than he was this season, and I think it was just too obvious. It was too easy to tell what was going to happen every time he lined up in the backfield. So we'll have to wait and see how they play all of this with Ricky Pearsall. Will they value Ricky Pearsall and things like jet sweeps? How will they make those types of decisions offensively? And I'm sure there's also going to be some offensive restructuring from last year anyways, because Kyle mentioned several times the need to do some of that. So I think there will be a lot of interesting planning going on behind the scenes. I don't expect the 49ers are not going to replace a Deebo Samuel with some player, but I do wonder, value-wise, if they're going to go for a WR2 kind of guy. I don't think that they will. I think they're going to expect to see Ricky Pearsall step into some of that role. So it's going to be super interesting. Let me know what you think in the comments about that one. Do you believe the breakout player of the year throughout the entire NFL? Would you pick Ricky Pearsall to be that guy? I love it. I think it's a bold pick, and I hope that I'm right. I hope it's inevitable because I'm hyped for it. I'm ready to go. We are now 69 days away from the NFL draft. Of course, we are something like 20-something days. I should probably do that one too, until free agency opens. So there's a lot of stuff to happen, a lot of conversations that are already happening. So make sure you're subscribed and you stick around so you don't miss out on all of the action. Appreciate you. Hope you have a fantastic Friday.